We've heard that Anzac Day is in the public conception about mateship, self-sacrifice, courage and initiative. And I think that we need to use these lenses to remember our own history. Michael mentioned the frontier wars, and this is becoming widely known now as the description of the conflicts between Indigenous Australians and European settlers that were held on Australian soil. So on a day when we remember Australia's sacrifice in military activity around the world, we have tended to have a blindness to our own military invasion of Australia and sacrifice of Indigenous in countless massacres up until the 1930s. So the map on the left shows the sites where massacres have taken place, and the banner on the right was taken yesterday at the parade, again enumerating many of the massacres. I belong to a local committee of ANTAR, a group that activates for justice, rights and respect for Australia's First Peoples. And this group joins Indigenous and other supportive Australians marching each year at the back of the Anzac Veterans March to raise awareness of the frontier wars. The wars that mark the first peoples of this country who died fighting to protect their country. This march is an unofficial part of the Anzac Parade, but it has the consent of the War Memorial, the RSL and the Australian Federal Police. And the intention is to remind us of our history, to raise awareness of our history, not to be combative. And the group marches as far as Blamey Avenue. Last year, a number of ANTAR meetings were used to discuss our response to what happened at the 2015 event, where a scuffle broke out at this particular commemoration. An Indigenous man who was a returned soldier attempted to join the official march beyond Blamey Avenue, but was blocked by an Australian Federal Police officer who threatened to arrest him and shouted at the group, "This is not a day for you." Eventually it was made clear to the officer that the man was entitled to lay a wreath as part of his RSL company, but the outcome was that he was frog-marched to lay the wreath and then returned in the same undignified manner to the group. At the same event, a reporter from the SBS covering Indigenous affairs was confronted by police officers who demanded that he hand over his camera and footage. He was clearly shaken by this, but refused to hand over his camera despite being ridiculed by the police. Several official complaints were lodged following this incident, and ANTAR also protested in writing to the AFP. We received a reply which acknowledged that one of the officers had breached the code of conduct, and we were given assurance that officers were being educated in Indigenous history and cultural experience and rights. Here are a few images from this year's events. On the basis of research done at Charles Sturt University by one of our own former students, Hazel Davies, who's here in the front here, and she's been actively engaged with members of the Tent Embassy in the lead up to this Anzac Day, she has an ongoing investigation into the appropriateness of the desert pea as a symbol for the frontier wars, to be used in parallel to the red poppy, which is widely used in war commemoration. The desert pea is a flower that in Indigenous culture is known as a blood flower, due to the legend claimed as part of the custodial songline of the Ualayali people. It's a particularly apt symbol, Hazel argues, because it's not only is it a blood flower, it's closely connected to the land, it thrives in dry, arid regions, it traverses states and people groups, and it's native to Australia. And it's also a symbol used, as you might have noticed, in the CSU logo, so Hazel's investigation should be of great interest to us here. Hazel also linked the legend of the desert pea with the text in Genesis 4, where God answers Cain's question, "Am I my brother's keeper?" with the words, "Your brother's blood is crying out from the ground." Just as God expects Cain to acknowledge the wrong he has committed against his brother, so it is our hope that one day Australia will face up to its own past, acknowledge the blood that has been spilt on our own land, and allow values of mateship, self-sacrifice, courage and initiative to determine our relationship with our Indigenous inhabitants, as well as our war heroes, whose engagement in conflict has been outside of Australia. I want to turn now to a focus on peace rather than war, and in company with many who follow the Jesus who said, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the children of God." Another aspect of the Anzac commemorations that I've had involvement in, along with Susanna Payne here and several others who are here tonight, is the Anzac Eve Peace Vigil. Started in 2010 by Canberra Quakers, it's been embraced by many Canberrans who cherish peace and lament the terrible cost of war. And I quote Graham Dunstan, who's one of the organisers of the event: "The cultural challenge is to contest the militarisation of Australian history, to deny the glorification of war, and to make Anzac, as the National Day of Remembrance for the War Dead, more inclusive, and not just only of the frontier wars, but of all the various wars from which our various refugee settlers have fled." At the event over the past 5 years, Canberra's Chorus of Women has taken a leading role, composing and performing laments for the occasion, but also leading the gathered group in protest songs. Indigenous elders give welcome to the group who are meeting on land that's been cared for by their people since time immemorial. At the top of Mount Ainslie, with the city spread out below us, we acknowledge the beauty of the country and the wisdom of its custodians. Handmade lanterns are distributed and light the way from the top of Mount Ainslie down the Kokoda Memorial Track to the grassed area behind the War Memorial. The walk down the mountain is made in silence, enabling sober reflection on the darkness of grief and the fragility of peace at a time when our nation remembers the loss resulting from war. It's an embodiment of the phrase, "lest we forget." The group gathers for more songs and poetry in the forecourt of the War Memorial, and then some continue down Anzac Parade, where they spend all night, renewing the ancient custom of keeping watch in the night, calling the spirit of a community to a sacred purpose. The primary expression of this Anzac Eve event is lamentation, but it is also bathed with the grace and vision of peace. I've participated in this event because I'm committed to a God of peace, and because I agree with those who organise it that we need to lament rather than glorify war, to pray for peace, and to act to bring relief to all victims of war, including the bereaved, the displaced, the traumatised, and the morally injured. Just finish with a few references if you want to follow up any of these events. Thank you.